Everyone thought it was just another quiet summer afternoon. The cicadas hummed, sprinklers hissed across perfect green lawns, and the blue shimmer of my pool caught the sun like a jewel. But the knock at my door shattered that peace. Hard, loud, urgent. And when I opened it, the sight I saw made my stomach twist. 2 police officers stood there. Behind them, a boy no older than 12 clutched his phone like it was a weapon. His mother, Karen from down the street, crossed her arms, her lips pursed like she was the queen of the entire neighborhood. The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we got a call about a possible locked pool situation involving a minor. This young man says you're refusing him access to your property." I blinked once, twice. My mind tried to catch up with the absurdity of those words. My property, my pool, locked because it was supposed to be. And yet here I was, being treated like a criminal in my own home. The boy wouldn't meet my eyes. Karen, though, was staring straight at me, not with concern, not with shame, but with that smug little smile she always wore when she thought she'd won. And in that moment the air felt heavy, like I was standing on trial, accused of a crime I hadn't committed. Inside, my thoughts were spinning. Why would anyone think they had the right to use my pool? Why would a child be calling 911 for something so trivial? But the deeper question haunted me. What story had Karen fed him, and why? "Is it true?" the officer asked gently, though his partner's hand lingered near his belt. "Did you lock the pool while neighborhood children were waiting to use it?" My mouth went dry. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to slam the door. But all I said was, "Yes, because it's mine." The silence after those words felt like a crack in glass, thin, fragile, waiting to shatter. Karen's voice cut through it, sharp as broken glass. "See, she admits it. She's trying to keep the community out. She thinks she's better than us. My son was scared, and you left him no choice but to call for help." The boy shifted on his feet, shrinking under her words. I could see it. The way his shoulders curled. The way his eyes darted away from mine. It wasn't his idea. He hadn't wanted to do this. But he had no say, not when his mother had already decided who the villain would be. And standing there, something inside me cracked too. Because it wasn't just about a pool. It wasn't about rules or gates or keys. It was about being singled out, judged, painted as the outsider. The officer sighed, exchanged a glance with his partner, then looked at me. "Ma'am, technically she's right. A private pool is your property. Unless there's an emergency, there's no reason anyone else should be in it. But I need you to understand 911 is for emergencies, not disputes like this." Relief flickered for just a second, but then Karen scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "So nothing happens. She gets to hide behind her fence while the rest of us sweat in the heat. That's fair." I wanted to snap back, to remind her that fairness doesn't mean entitlement. That my years of saving, of working double shifts, of pouring everything I had into this home, gave me the right to enjoy it. But the words caught in my throat. Because what good would it do? Karen thrived on drama. She needed me to react so she could twist the story further. The officers eventually left, shaking their heads, leaving me with a warning that wasn't for me at all. "If she calls again over something like this, we'll handle it differently." Their eyes lingered on Karen. She didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. As the patrol car rolled away, I stood at my doorway, heart pounding. Karen finally pulled her son's hand, dragging him away with a victorious flick of her hair. But not before I caught the boy's eyes one last time. They were wide, confused, almost apologetic. And that's when the question settled heavy in my chest. If she was willing to use her own child as a pawn in her petty war against me, how far would she go next? What kind of mother teaches her child to dial 911 for a pool? That question echoed in my mind long after the police cruiser disappeared around the corner. I leaned against my doorway, staring at the stillness of my yard. The air smelled like chlorine and sun-warmed grass, but it didn't feel like summer anymore. It felt poisoned. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The next morning, the whispers started, not loud enough to be called gossip. Just soft voices carrying over trimmed hedges. Neighbors who once waved with friendly smiles now averted their eyes. A couple walking their dog slowed as they passed, their words a little too pointed. Some people just don't understand community. Community, the word felt sharp, like a blade meant to cut me out. I had worked so hard for this house. Years of saving every extra dollar, of scraping by in apartments where walls were paper-thin and neighbors fought through the night. This backyard pool wasn't just water. It was freedom, peace, my sanctuary, and suddenly it was being painted as selfishness. That evening I found the first note taped to my mailbox. No signature, just 3 words scrawled in thick black ink. Share the pool. I stood there, the paper trembling in my hand. The sun was setting, shadows stretching long across the street, and somewhere in the distance I could hear children laughing. Their voices carried like an accusation. Was this Karen, or had she pulled others into her scheme? I wanted to believe it was just her, but the note, the stares, the silence from people I thought were friendly, they told me otherwise. Days passed, and each one carried a new sting. A sprinkler mysteriously broken, trash bags left slashed open at the end of my drive. At first I told myself it was coincidence, but then I saw the look in Karen's eyes when I passed her in the cul-de-sac. That smirk, that tiny, satisfied lift of her chin. She wanted me to know. She wanted me to feel cornered. And yet, there was one thing that kept haunting me more than her. Her son, the boy who had dialed 911, who had stood in front of my house with wide, uncertain eyes. I saw him sometimes riding his bike past my driveway, his mother's voice trailing behind him like a leash. He never waved, but he always looked, just long enough for me to wonder, long enough for me to see the truth in his silence. This wasn't his fight, it was hers. One night, unable to sleep, I sat on my porch with the pool lights glowing soft blue behind me. The water rippled quietly, reflecting the stars, and I thought about that boy. About how heavy it must feel, carrying his mother's battles on his small shoulders. And that's when the thought struck me, sharp and undeniable. If she could manipulate him once, what would stop her from doing worse? The next morning I called the HOA office. My voice was calm, too calm, as I explained the situation. The officer on the phone sighed like he'd heard it all before. Ma'am, disputes between neighbors are tricky. If it escalates further, file a report. But we can't stop children from calling emergency services. Tricky, that was the word he used, as though harassment, lies, and police at my door were just tricky. When I hung up, I stared at the pool through the window. Its surface was glassy, untouched. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like I was defending a fortress I never wanted to build. And then came the second note. This one wasn't taped to my mailbox. It was slipped under my door. The handwriting was the same, thick, messy strokes, but the message had changed. You don't belong here. Those words sank into me like stones, heavy, unshakable. I held the paper until it crumpled in my hand. For a long time, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, staring at nothing, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my own heart. Was this what they all thought? That I didn't belong? That no matter how much I worked, how much I paid, how much I built, this place would never really be mine? The thought burned, but beneath the sting something else began to stir, a slow, steady heat rising in my chest. Because if there's one thing I knew about myself, it was this. I had not fought my way here just to be bullied back into silence. So when Karen passed me on the street the next day, her eyes smug, her boy trailing behind her, I didn't look away. I didn't shrink, I let her see me watching, calm, steady, unshaken. And for the first time, her smirk faltered. It was just a flicker, gone as fast as it came, but I saw it, that tiny crack in her armor. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. She could send notes, she could whisper, she could turn neighbors against me, even use her son as a shield, but she wouldn't win. Because dignity doesn't always look like silence. Sometimes, it looks like standing your ground, even when the world tells you to move. The sound of gravel crunching under tires pulled me to the window. Another HOA board member's car, slowing down in front of my house. They didn't stop, not at first. Just lingered, eyes flicking over my yard, over my pool gate, before rolling on like nothing was unusual. But it was unusual, because in this neighborhood nothing ever happened by accident. By evening the letter came. Neatly typed, stamped with the HOA logo, slipped clean into my mailbox like a dagger hidden in velvet. I unfolded it with shaking hands, though I already knew what it would say. Notice of concern. The words blurred for a second as I read them. They claimed multiple complaints had been filed, that I was excluding community members from shared resources, that my property was being used in a manner inconsistent with neighborhood spirit. Shared resources, neighborhood spirit. They twisted everything, my own pool, bought with my own money, on land I worked my whole life to call mine, into some kind of crime. I could almost hear Karen's voice between the lines, smug, satisfied, victorious. She had gotten to them. She had planted her poison, and the board had swallowed it whole. I dropped the letter on the table and pressed my hands to my face. For a long time, I just sat there in the silence of my kitchen, fighting the weight pressing down on me, because this wasn't just gossip anymore. It wasn't just neighbors whispering behind hedges. This was official. Paperwork, threats hidden in polite language. And still, one question burned brighter than the rest. How far would she take it? That weekend, the pool sat untouched again. The sun baked down, kids laughed in the cul-de-sac, sprinklers spun lazily in arcs across manicured lawns. But my gate stayed locked, and the air around me felt heavy. Neighbors walked slower when they passed, their conversations dipping into sudden hushes. I didn't need to hear the words, they were written in their stares. Then late one night, I heard it. A soft rattle at the gate, the faint metallic clink of the lock being tested. I froze in the dark of my bedroom, every nerve awake. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the crickets. I crept to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough. And there he was. Karen's son, standing small and unsure in the glow of the streetlight. His hand still on the lock, his head turning toward the shadows like he was afraid of being caught. I wanted to fling the window open to shout to ask him what he thought he was doing, but then I saw it. The way his little shoulders sagged, the way he wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. He wasn't sneaking for himself, he was sneaking for her. I stepped back from the window, pressing my hand against the glass to steady myself. My anger twisted into something else, something heavier, because I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was a child being dragged into a war he never asked to fight. The next day I tried to forget it, but I couldn't. His face kept flashing in my mind, that lost look in his eyes. It gnawed at me all morning until finally I grabbed my keys and walked straight to the HOA office. The receptionist looked up, startled, as I marched in. My voice was steady, sharper than I felt inside. I want to know who filed these complaints. I want to see them in writing. She fumbled with a stack of papers, eyes darting nervously. I don't think I can share that information, ma'am. Then let me make it easy for you, I cut in. It was Karen, wasn't it? The silence was my answer. When I left, the air outside felt hotter, thicker, like the whole neighborhood was closing in. But underneath the anger boiling in me, there was something else. A seed of determination. Because if Karen wanted to drag me into battle, she had no idea how much fight I had left in me. That evening I saw her across the street, standing tall, arms folded like she had been waiting. Our eyes met, and for a moment the world went still. She smiled that same smug smile, and I swear I could hear her voice without her even speaking. You don't belong. But I didn't look away. Not this time. Because sometimes the strongest stand you can make isn't loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to bow when the world tells you to bend. And in that quiet standoff across the street, I made another promise to myself. If she wanted war, I'd give her one. But not on her terms, on mine. The envelope was thick, too thick for just another notice of concern. When I pulled it from the mailbox, my fingers trembled. The HOA seal stared back at me like a warning. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and just stared. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to open it. Because I already knew. When I finally tore it open, the words spilled out sharp and heavy. Violation notice. My heart sank as I read the list of accusations. Failure to comply with neighborhood cooperation guidelines. Obstructing communal goodwill. And the one that nearly made me laugh, improper use of shared amenities. Shared amenities. They'd twisted my pool into something it had never been, something it was never meant to be. And at the bottom, stamped in bold, was the threat. Fines would begin if the situation wasn't resolved. Resolved, meaning what? Hand over my keys, unlock the gate. Let Karen and her son march in like they own the place. I sat back in my chair, clutching the letter so tightly the paper crumpled. For a moment the weight of it pressed down on me, and I felt small, like the walls were closing in, like the whole neighborhood had turned against me. But then something shifted. Because I realized this wasn't just about the pool anymore. This was about control, about being silenced, pushed out, erased. And I had fought too hard for too many years to let anyone take that from me. I laid the letter flat on the table, smoothed out the creases, and whispered into the quiet, "No." The next day, I called the HOA office again. My voice didn't shake this time. "I want copies of the bylaws," I demanded. "Every line, every rule, and I want them today." There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. "You can pick them up this afternoon." When I drove to the office, Karen's car was parked outside. My stomach twisted, but I walked in anyway. She was there, leaning against the counter, chatting with the receptionist like she owned the place. When she saw me, her smile widened, dripping with fake sweetness. "Oh, hello," she said. "I was just stopping by to check on things, making sure our community stays fair." Her words were honey, but her eyes were knives. I didn't answer. I just took the stack of bylaws from the receptionist's trembling hands and walked out. I could feel Karen's gaze burning into my back, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of turning around. That night, I spread the papers across my dining table. Page after page of rules, regulations, and clauses. My highlighter flew across the lines, marking every passage about private property, and there it was clear as daylight. Pools, fences, gates, all privately owned. HOA had no authority to demand shared access. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that had been slipping away: power. The next board meeting was announced 2 days later. Community participation encouraged. I knew what that meant. Karen would be there, smiling, spinning her lies, but this time I wouldn't be silent. When the night came, I walked into the room with my binder of bylaws clutched in my hands. Conversations hushed as I entered. Eyes followed me to my seat. Karen sat near the front, her son beside her, bored and fidgeting with a pencil. She looked back at me, that same smirk plastered on her face. The meeting began with routine business, budgets, landscaping, minor disputes. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I waited. I knew my moment was coming. Then it did. Karen stood. Her voice carried across the room, sweet but sharp. "We have a serious issue to address. A neighbor who refuses to cooperate with community values, who denies children the right to enjoy our neighborhood amenities, who believes her property is more important than the rest of us." Gasps rippled through the room. All eyes turned to me. I rose slowly, my binder heavy in my hands. My voice was calm, steady. "That's not true, and you know it." Karen tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh, then explain why your pool gate is locked day after day while children suffer in the heat." I flipped the binder open, the highlighted lines glowing under the fluorescent lights. "Because it's mine. Because these bylaws, your own rules, say clearly that private pools are not subject to community use. You can't fine me. You can't threaten me. And you certainly can't weaponize your child to call 911 because you feel entitled." The room went silent. The board members shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between me and the words on the page. For a moment, Karen's smile faltered, but then she straightened, her voice rising. "She's twisting the rules. She doesn't care about community. She only cares about herself." Her son tugged at her sleeve, whispering something. She brushed him off, her face tightening. I took a breath, looked straight at the board. "I've worked too hard to build this life. I've followed every rule, paid every due, and I will not be bullied out of what I rightfully own." The silence that followed was heavy, uncertain, but somewhere in the back I saw a neighbor nod, then another. Small, quiet gestures, but enough to remind me I wasn't entirely alone. Karen sat down, her jaw tight, her son staring at the floor. And as the board moved awkwardly to the next topic, I knew one thing for certain. This war was far from over, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to fight. The night after the meeting, I sat by the pool with the water glowing soft and blue beneath the lights. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. I had spoken my truth. I had stood my ground, and for a brief, fragile moment, I believed maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. But peace doesn't last long when someone like Karen is your neighbor. The first sign came the next morning. A pile of soggy flyers on my doorstep, each one stamped with bold, angry letters. Selfish neighbor blocks kids from pool. They were cheap, printed in black and white, the kind of thing you'd expect in a smear campaign, and that's exactly what it was. By afternoon, I saw them pinned to bulletin boards, taped to lampposts, even tucked under windshield wipers. Her voice was everywhere, even when she was. Walking to my mailbox felt like walking through enemy territory. Neighbors whispered louder now, no longer pretending. A woman I once traded recipes with clutched her child's hand as she passed me like I was dangerous, like I was a threat. But what stung most was the boy, Karen's son. I saw him on the sidewalk, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes fixed on the ground. He didn't look at me this time, not even a flicker, and I wondered how many times he'd been forced to listen to her twisted version of the story, how many times she'd told him I was the villain. That night I found another note. This one scrawled in thick red marker, shoved under my door so violently it left a crease in the wood. Give it up or else. I sat there on the floor, staring at the paper in my lap, my chest rising and falling with each shaky breath. The walls felt too close, the air too heavy. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a threat. I thought about calling the police, about reporting her. But then I remembered the way those officers had looked at me that first day, like it was all just a misunderstanding, like it was all too small to matter. Would they believe me now, or would Karen just twist it again, turn it into another spectacle? I folded the note carefully and placed it in a drawer with the others. Evidence, because deep down I knew this was building to something bigger. And I was right. The following weekend, I woke to shouting outside my window. I rushed to the porch, my heart pounding, and froze. Karen stood at my gate, rattling it so hard the lock clanged against the metal. Her son was with her, his face pale, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. "You think you can hide behind your rules," she screamed. "You think a little binder makes you untouchable." Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some stepping out onto porches. The cul-de-sac buzzed with tension, all eyes fixed on my yard. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. "This is trespassing, Karen. You need to leave." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Trespassing? In my own neighborhood. This pool should be open to everyone, and you know it." Her son shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "Mom, let's go." But she ignored him, her hands still gripping the gate. For a moment, fear tightened around me like a rope. But then I remembered the weight of that binder in my hands at the meeting, the nods of neighbors who had seen the truth for themselves, and something inside me steadied. "Leave," I said firmly, my voice louder now. "Before I call the police again, and this time it'll be you they deal with, not me." Karen froze, her smirk faltering for just a second. Around us, whispers rippled through the crowd. They were watching, they were seeing. Finally, she let go of the gate, her nails leaving faint scratches on the paint. She turned, tugging her son roughly by the arm. "This isn't over," she hissed. And as she stormed away, her son looked back at me, just for a moment, his eyes wide, pleading, silent words written across his face, "I'm sorry." I stood there long after they disappeared, my hands trembling, my chest tight. Because I knew the truth now. This wasn't just about a pool, it never had been. This was about power, control, the need to dominate, and Karen wasn't going to stop, not until she broke me, or until I broke her hold. I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, and made myself another promise. If she wanted a war, she would have it, but I wouldn't fight with anger, I wouldn't fight with threats. I'd fight with truth, with patience, with every ounce of strength I had left. Because sometimes the strongest revenge isn't fire. It's endurance. The night it happened, the pool was glowing like glass under the moon. I had left the lights on, a habit now, like keeping a watchful eye over something too precious to lose. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet, until a sound split the stillness. A splash. I froze in the doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs. Another splash followed, lighter this time, followed by a muffled laugh. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was in my pool. I crept closer, phone clutched tight in my hand, and peered through the shadows. And there they were. Coren's son, shivering in the water, and Coren herself, perched smugly on a lawn chair like a queen who had claimed her prize. Rage flared hot in my chest, but it wasn't just rage. It was fear. Fear for the boy who was trembling, his small hands gripping the side of the pool. Fear for myself, knowing if he slipped, if he drowned, the blame wouldn't fall on her. It would fall on me. I stepped into the light, my voice cutting sharp through the night. Get out now. Coren didn't flinch. She smiled. See, he loves it. This is what community looks like. Not gates, not locks, joy, freedom. Her son's teeth chattered as he whispered, Mom, I'm cold. But she ignored him. Her eyes were locked on me, daring me to make a move. My hand shook as I lifted my phone, snapping picture after picture, then switching to record. Her smile faltered. What are you doing? She snapped. Collecting proof, I said coldly. Of trespassing, of endangerment, of every single line you've crossed. For the first time, she looked uneasy. She scrambled to her feet, yanking her son out of the water, wrapping him in a towel so roughly he stumbled. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. I didn't blink. Try me. They left in a flurry of mutters and slamming gates, but I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the photos, replaying the video. Her son's trembling body, her smug grin, her voice caught crystal clear on the recording. This is what community looks like. It was damning, but more than that, it was heartbreaking, because I saw the truth in the boy's eyes. He wasn't joyful. He wasn't free. He was trapped, dragged into a war he didn't understand, used as a pawn in his mother's obsession. The next morning, I printed everything. Photos, transcripts, even copies of the threatening notes. I slid them into a folder, thick and heavy, the kind of weight that could crush lies. For days, I kept the folder close. In my car, on my desk, even under my pillow at night. Not because I was ready to use it, but because holding it reminded me I wasn't powerless anymore. Still, Coren didn't stop. The flyers came back, brighter now in color. Some had my face crudely pasted onto cartoon villains. Children pointed as I walked past. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid me. The humiliation was sharp, but it didn't cut as deep as it once had, because I knew something she didn't know. I had truth, and truth, when held long enough, becomes a weapon sharper than any lie. One evening, as I watered the roses by the fence, I heard voices on the other side. Coren's voice, low and urgent. If we keep pushing, she'll cave. She can't fight all of us. Another neighbor's uncertain reply. But what if she's right? What if the bylaws? She's not right, Coren snapped. She's selfish, dangerous. She doesn't belong here. That phrase again, doesn't belong. As if belonging was something she owned, something she could give or take at will. I let the hose run until the soil was muddy, my hand clenched tight around the nozzle. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity, because I realized something vital. Coren wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting control slipping through her fingers, and people like her don't stop until someone makes them. The board meeting was only a week away. And this time I wouldn't come with just highlighted lines. I would come with proof, with evidence no one could twist, no one could deny. But even as I prepared, a heavy thought lingered in the back of my mind. How much longer could her son survive under her shadow? The room was already buzzing when I walked in. Folding chairs scraped against the floor, papers shuffled, whispers spread like wildfire. The HOA meetings were usually dull affairs, budget disputes, landscaping complaints, but tonight there was electricity in the air. Everyone knew why. Coren sat front and center, her son beside her. He stared at his sneakers, shoulders curled inward, while she looked around with the air of a politician ready to deliver her grand speech. When her eyes met mine, her lips curved into that same cold smirk. The message was clear: you're walking into my arena. But this time, I wasn't walking in empty-handed. The folder in my hands felt heavy, but not with fear. with power. The meeting began the way they all did. Roll call, routine matters, but the tension built with every minute until finally the president cleared his throat. There is one pressing matter regarding community complaints. Karen, you asked to bring it before the board. She stood with the grace of someone stepping onto a stage. Thank you. As you all know, we have a neighbor who has repeatedly refused to share her pool, who has our children access, and who continues to act in ways that damage our community spirit. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. She spread her hands as if offering them proof, her voice dripping with righteousness. This is not just selfishness. This is cruelty. Children shouldn't suffer in the summer heat because one person decides she's above the rest of us. The board members shifted in their seats, their pens hovering nervously. And then she delivered her final blow. We should fine her, force her compliance, or remove her from the community entirely. Her words hit like a hammer. My pulse thudded in my ears, but I rose slowly, deliberately. My chair scraped the floor, echoing through the silence. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. May I speak? I asked. The president hesitated, then nodded. Go ahead. I walked to the front, my folder tucked tight against my chest. Karen's smirk widened like she was already savoring her victory. I laid the folder on the table, flipped it open, and let the silence stretch for just a beat. Then I spoke, my voice calm but steady. Karen says I'm selfish, that I'm cruel, that I deny children joy, but what she hasn't told you is the truth. I pulled out the first sheet, photos of her son shivering in my pool under the moonlight, his hands clinging to the edge. Murmurs broke out immediately. Karen stiffened. This, I continued, holding up the page, is trespassing. This is endangerment. And this, I tapped the image of her standing smugly by the water, is the person responsible. The whispers grew louder, shock rippling through the room. Karen's face went pale, then flushed red. Those are lies, she shouted. Fabricated, anyone could. I cut her off, sliding another sheet onto the table. A transcript. Her voice captured crystal clear. See, he loves it. This is what community looks like. The room fell silent, dead silent. The recording played from my phone, her words echoing off the walls. Her son buried his face in his hands. I turned back to the board, my voice quieter now but sharper. She didn't care about community. She didn't care about joy. She cared about control, about using her own child as a pawn in a war she invented. One of the board members cleared his throat, his pen dropping onto the table. Another shifted uncomfortably in her seat, refusing to meet Karen's eyes. I slid the final pieces of evidence across the table, the threatening notes, the flyers smeared with lies. This is harassment, this is bullying, and it has no place in our neighborhood. For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. The weight of it all pressed down on the room, heavy and undeniable. Then the president leaned forward, his voice low but firm. Karen, do you have anything to say for yourself? She stammered, words tangling in her throat. She twisted everything. You don't understand. But her son's voice cut through the chaos. Quiet, trembling, but strong enough to carry. Mom, stop. Every head turned toward him. He lifted his face, his eyes wet but steady. I didn't want to call the police. I didn't want to go in the pool. You made me. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The boy looked down again, his small shoulders shaking, and in that moment I realized the truth had finally broken through, not because of me, but because of him. The president's gavel struck the table once, sharp and final. Enough, the board will deliberate, but for now the matter is closed. I gathered my folder, my hands steady now. As I walked back to my seat, the whispers that followed me weren't sharp this time. They weren't judgment. They were something else, something closer to respect. Karen sat frozen, her face pale, her son silent beside her. For the first time, she looked small. And for the first time, I felt free. The days after the meeting felt different. The air wasn't lighter exactly. It was still thick with whispers, still heavy with tension, but something had shifted. For the first time in weeks, I could walk down the street without eyes burning holes in my back. Some neighbors even nodded again, hesitant but real. A small act, but one that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Karen was quiet, too quiet. Her car stayed parked for days, her blinds stayed closed. The once constant sound of her voice echoing across the cul-de-sac had vanished, and though I should felt relieved, I didn't. Because silence from someone like her isn't surrender, it's planning. Still, there was one thing even she couldn't silence, her son. I saw him again a week later, riding his bike slowly past my house. He didn't look at me, not at first. But as he passed, he lifted one hand just slightly before quickly shoving it back into his pocket. A wave, small, almost invisible, but it said everything. He had found his voice at the meeting, and now maybe he was finding his freedom too. The board's decision arrived in the mail 2 days later. I held the envelope in my hands, bracing for more weight, more accusations. But when I opened it, the words made my chest tighten with something I hadn't felt in so long: relief. The board finds no evidence of violations. No fines will be issued. Further harassment from any community member will result in disciplinary action. It was over, at least on paper. That night I sat by the pool again. The water rippled gently in the warm breeze, reflecting the stars like shattered glass. I thought about everything: the 911 call, the notes, the flyers, the shouts at my gate. And most of all, I thought about the boy. Because this story wasn't really about a pool. It wasn't about bylaws or gates or even Karen's obsession with control. It was about the cost of standing your ground, the price of dignity, and the people who get caught in battles they never chose. I knew the whispers wouldn't vanish overnight. Some neighbors would always see me through Karen's lens, no matter how much truth I laid bare. But that was the thing about truth. It doesn't need everyone to believe it. It just needs to stand. And I had stood. Karen never apologized. People like her rarely do, but little by little her influence faded. The flyers stopped. The threats stopped. Even the whispers dulled to nothing more than background noise. She became just another house on the street, loud once but forgotten. Her son, though, sometimes I'd catch him glancing at my yard, his gaze lingering on the pool. Not with resentment, not with entitlement, but with something closer to longing, and maybe hope. One afternoon, as he biked past, he slowed just enough to meet my eyes. His lips moved, too quiet for anyone else to hear. "Thank you." 2 words, small, trembling, but heavier than any note Karen had ever shoved under my door. I smiled just slightly and nodded, no words needed. Because sometimes victories aren't loud. They aren't about applause or grand speeches. Sometimes they're quiet, a boy's whisper, a nod from a neighbor, the sound of water rippling in the stillness of night. And as I sat there, listening to the hum of cicadas and the soft splash of the pool filter, I realized something. Belonging isn't given. It isn't handed out by self-appointed gatekeepers or secured by flyers and threats. Belonging is claimed, earned, stood for. And no matter how much Karen tried to take it from me, this place, this home, this life, I belonged. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the quiet wrap around me. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't the quiet of fear. It was the quiet of peace.